Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Rabid Dog's House, where we like to discuss lost or forgotten horror gems with a little bit of bite. I'm your host, Justin Steele, and tonight we are going to discuss 1998's The Faculty. Directed by Robert Rodriguez and starring Elijah Wood, Clea Duvall, Josh Hartnett, Laura Harris, Bebe Newworth, Robert Patrick, and Piper Laurie. Whether you belong to the popular crowd or are an outcast, high school is tough. Even worse is when your teachers are being taken over by an alien parasite that just wants everybody to conform. The Faculty follows a group of teens made up of each designated high school clique from nerd to jock. This group of teens are aware that something is going wrong at their high school, and in order to survive, they must defeat the force that is taking over their teachers and classmates. That is, of course, if they can even trust each other. The late 1990s saw the resurgence of the teen horror genre with the release of 1996's Scream, which we will discuss in this episode, and The Faculty is an excellent example of why that time frame in horror is so celebrated. Delivering a fun balance of terror and laughs, The Faculty is pure entertainment. The Faculty is for the horror fan that enjoys late 90s horror with witty teens and a fun sci-fi element. Also joining me tonight is my fabulous co-host Zena Dixon and our special guest Tyler Doupe. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us for another episode of the Rabid Dog's House, where we like to discuss lost or forgotten horror gems with a little bit of bite. Thank you, Zena Dixon, the real queen of horror, as always, for joining us. How you doing tonight, Zena?
Doing good.
It's so good to see your face.
Good
Tyler
to see you.
Doupe is also joining us tonight. How are you doing tonight, Tyler?
Doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here, because tonight we like to have Tyler on for some of our bigger episodes. We've had him on for our Dario Argento and for our Brian De Palma. And tonight we're going to be discussing The Faculty and a general conversation about that late 90s horror streak that I think we all love and enjoy. And for us in particular is very special. You know, jumping right in, we will always have our non-spoiler reviews. And then later on, we will let you know ahead of time when spoilers happen. And when that happens, stop watching this if you have not seen The Faculty and come back and then finish this episode. But I'll just say, starting right now, The Faculty came in. For me, I saw it opening day in the theater. I was almost a senior in high school. Either I was a junior or senior, but the years before when Scream came out, which I think, pretty much jump-started the entire trend. When Scream came out, I had two older brothers growing up. I'd seen horror movies dozens of times. For me, it was just like a part of my childhood. It wasn't anything special. But around my freshman year of high school, I really got back into like slashers and 80s horror movies and starting to like understand the reoccurring themes and tropes, all that stuff. So when Scream came out, I was like, oh, this is made for me. So I had to see all of those. And I love all of those. We've got the Scream trilogies, Disturbing Behavior, I Know What You Did Last Summer, all those great ones. And I saw them all. But The Faculty, I remember thinking was pretty cool. And that one stuck with me because the soundtrack, I bought it. I loved it. I remember my senior year of high school driving on graduation day, listening to like I'm 18, even though I was only 17. It was a promise to come. I'm 18 and, another brick in the wall, all that stuff. It made me feel cool. Watching these movies made me feel cool. I wasn't a theater nerd, but I was a theater nerdish. And so these movies were all of a sudden a reason to kind of like, I could talk to anybody about them. And so they're always going to be super special to me. But I love The Faculty. I think it's definitely one of the solid ones. I love all those movies. I really do. Good, bad, and the ugly. But there's obviously the better ones. And The Faculty, I think, is top of the line. I love the sci-fi themes. I love the energy about it, the performances. I think Clea Duvall is my favorite person in it. But, Josh Hartnett had just been in Hollow and H2O. So I was kind of like, oh, awesome, here he is again. And Elijah Wood, the good son. I can't tell you how many times I've watched that movie as a kid. I loved him and everything. So it was like this, it was sort of like a fun celebration for me in that. But anyway, I think it's fun, scary. Contemporary criticisms of the times were sort of mixed, but it's definitely like in later years received this nice, people seem to go back in this like retrospective perspective to be like, oh, it's good. They get it now. They get the themes and all that. And there are some cheesy moments in it, but that's what was about these movies. It was you had the darker elements of like the early 90s with psychological thrillers, or late 80s with Heathers, where the kids of the John Hughes, generation were going to become mixed with these horror movies. And that's what Kevin Williamson really did. But for me, these were a little bit lighter. All of a sudden, they had a more optimistic tone. And so I just really came to love it. But anyway, I could go on and on. We'll get into it all. But Tyler, do you want to go ahead and tell us, how did you first come into the faculty? What do you love about it? What are your initial thoughts?
I think like you, I saw it in high school, and I think we're pretty close in age because I graduated in 2000. So
me too.
Okay.
2000.
So we we probably happened upon it right around the same time. I don't remember if I saw it on opening night or when exactly I saw it, but I know that I connected with it, and I didn't really pick up on it at the time necessarily because I was still sort of finding my way into being a horror fan. In my high school years, but looking back on it now, it's really obviously kind of like The Breakfast Club meets The Thing meets Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and I love that about it. I think that it's such a peculiar kind of melding of genres, but it works beautifully, and I love it. I'm surprised that it wasn't received with open arms when it was released. The critical response was kind of tepid. Because I think it's a really solid sci-fi horror film. And I think it really meant a lot to me as a 16, 17-year-old, however old I was, just because I was the age of the characters at the time that I was seeing it. And I really think I connected with the teachers are out to get us angle. I don't know, that just felt like very universally appealing to a 16-year-old.
For sure. Yeah, when I was 16, 17, I was lucky enough to have a weekend job with no bills, and a car. So my life was literally spent working on the weekend, and then all I had was an extra $200 a week to just go blow on whatever. So, this time, what was I going to do but drive and go see these movies over and over again? But criticism at the time, yeah, I think it just became, because it's that sort of cynicism that always creeps in. When you have something good, like Scream, I know you did last summer, people eventually want to be like, want to be the first to start saying these are bad. We hadn't quite reached the parodies of Scary Movie yet, but I think that, is a lot of why people, criticisms had a hesitancy toward it. But Zena, how did you first come into the faculty? What are your thoughts about it? What do you love about it, etc.?
Yeah, I remember checking this one out actually on video. I didn't get to go to the movies because I'm the youngest of 6, and my parents, just to haul us all to the movie theater, it would have to be like a super special occasion, So unfortunately, I didn't see it on the big screen, but I remember watching it and I absolutely just like fell in love with it. Like I remember around the time we had of course, a couple of years before, we had Scream, but we also had Disturbing Behavior. And I don't remember when that one came out, but I was just in love with both of those movies, And then when I rewatched it as a teenager, I still felt the same way, And I remember for some reason, people would kind of forget about this one. Not like, oh, it doesn't exist. It's just kind of like when you think about the 90s horror and 90s sci-fi horror, what do you think about, And so it's funny when Tyler mentioned like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Thing, Breakfast Club type of thing. That's kind of what I was thinking with it, those movies, But even when I think about the 90s, The Faculty is one of the movies that immediately comes to mind, And I actually had a chance to rewatch it like earlier this month, and it's just so freaking good still to this day. And it's not, I know we didn't dabble into this yet, I'm sure that we will. When it comes to Kevin Williamson, to me, this doesn't really feel like his kind of movie compared to the ones that we've seen, and then because this one isn't a horror, but even when I think about Teaching Mrs. Tangle, that one matches more of what he, what he used to like dabble in and stuff like that. But like you both, like I love this movie. I think that it's so good. I love the characters. I love the pacing. I love just like the practical effects, like especially when it comes to the creature. Like obviously they use some CGI, for the movement, but it's just still so good. And then just the last thing, because, I can keep going, with Robert Rodriguez, he just has quite the resume. you know, quite the resume. So just that he has this on here, it's just like, it was unexpected, you know. But like I said, I saw it as a kid. I really, you know, I didn't know who the director was at the time or anything, but kind of like what Justin said, you know, Josh Hartnett, you know, you've seen him before, and then, you know, Elijah Wood, and he was in and The Good Son. And like you, I used to always rewatch that movie as well. But yeah, point is, it's great. It's a wonderful, wonderful movie. And this is actually one of the movies I usually recommend to friends who say that they either don't like horror, you know, horror sci-fi, or I actually have a friend, she hates teen movies. Like, and like, not like any movie that basically has teens in it, she doesn't want to watch it, you know. But she was a big fan of this one.
I think it is a great movie too for those that, you know, are maybe not the biggest horror fans or, you know, graphic, all that, but it does have this nice refreshing quality because it's a little bit different than the other ones, but kind of shines. But if we're ready, everybody, we're going to start getting into some spoilers. So again, go watch it, watch a whole bunch of 90s movies, and then come back and finish this episode, or spoil yourself and keep watching. To each their own. But again, let's jump into it. I mean, I think, you know, you have movies like The Craft or Wes Craven's New Nightmare or even Fear that came out before Scream, and they were successful and people love them. But the general style, it's the same thing, I think, in terms of a seminal movie like Halloween, where you have semi-slashers beforehand and all these movies. But once Halloween came out, that really led to the formula that we got for the next decade. And I think Scream is that same type of movie. And a big part of that, I know, you know, deservedly so, Wes Craven gets a huge amount of the credit for that. At the time, Kevin Williamson did, but just in retrospect now, I feel like most people credit it to Wes Craven. But I'm glad you brought up Kevin Williamson, Zena, because I think Kevin Williamson was maybe even more the reason what made it so successful. It was obviously that destined to be collaboration, but Kevin Williamson was about to do Scream and Dawson's Creek. And I think that those two things had such a huge impact on pop culture at the time, because these movies really are like John Hughes movies that are meeting contemporary teens in these horrifying situations. But these kids are hip, they know. And that was like in every single review, it was hip. This movie is hip, clever, hip and scary, interesting, hip and wonderful, totally hip and neato. And it's just how they were, that every single one. And it's true. But for me, what was great about it and why I think I love these movies so much, or at least if I want to be, you know, academic and think about it myself, is that for, you know, I watched The Breakfast Club, I watched Pretty in Pink, but these were all the kids my oldest brother's age. These were movies for them. And finally it arrived. It came to me and it was my turn. And Scream started it off. But, you know, you did have then all of a sudden the Scream trilogy. I Know What You Did Last Summer. I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. Urban Legend, Urban Legends, Disturbing Behavior, Cherry Falls, Halloween H2O, Teaching Mrs. Tingle, The Curve, Idle Hands, and so on and so forth. And you had all these great movies. And like we said, they had varying degrees of success, but there's a lot of reoccurring themes. The Faculty, for instance, starts off, I mean, you have the sort of like preamble about what's good, you know, the teachers. And like Tyler said, a big appeal in this movie, especially to a teenager, is the idea that the parents are out to get us, the teachers are out to get us. But once that preamble happens, you have this sort of introduction of each of the characters. And I like that. I like that it's really refreshing and swift. You come in, you have a moment with Elijah Wood, and you're told here's this character. Clea Duvall comes in, here's this character. And they each represent a different clique. And like a lot of movies at that time, you kind of, they're led through, you're usually given one character who's kind of new to the school, and you get to see all the cliques that happen. And Disturbing Behavior is another one like that, where you've got this boy, he's upset because his brother committed suicide, and now he's at the school and he's learning the cliques, because each school has the same kind of cliques, but a little bit different, but basically the same. And it's interesting because I think at the time in the late 90s, racism, homophobia, sexism, classism, there was this sort of idea that those were a thing of the past. They didn't exist anymore. And obviously that's not true. And it was going to get even worse over the next 20 some years. And I love that, as always, the horror genre the genre that always gets the I think the most belittled, or has super fans and people really respect the horror genre, but mainstream wise it gets pushed to the side. This is the one genre, if you want to combine the sci-fi genre with it too, that is always like, I don't think so, pay a little bit more attention. There's still some stuff going on here. And if you watch movies like The Faculty or Disturbing Behavior, they make these reference to these things still happening and showing it. And it was our my universe at that time, cliques, all that stuff, but in a way that was like I said, I was theater nerd-ish. I didn't quite fit into theater nerds, but there were these blendings, but it was still there. But tell us, Zena, will you get us started this time on your thought of like the 90s in general, the late 90s horror field, all that good stuff, everything that I just kind of said, but your kind of take on what do you love about it? What do you think about those thoughts?
I absolutely love 90s horror. First, I feel like before I get into like slashers, it just feels like you get a little bit of everything. You know how we kind of like in the 80s, it was pretty much all about, of course, would have like the subgenres like slashers and everything like that. But I remember watching like obviously killer dolls, killer robots, animal attack. Like there's just so much in the 90s. And it's just, and you kind of get a little bit of it in the early 2000s, like it trickles in a little bit before we move more into like Saw and Hostile, you know what I mean? So it kind of switches, it gets meaner. That's what that is. It gets really mean in the 2000s. So with this, kind of like what you said, okay, just with the faculty, it is very it's a sci-fi horror. It's, it has the horror, like the horror, it has the sci-fi, but there is some cheese to it that fits very well. And then when I think about some of the other, like, again with the 90s, horror, it's the same thing. So I already mentioned it, but with Disturbing Behavior, again, because it's one of my favorite movies, there was a part that was supposed to be scary. I mean, I don't know, but I just remember laughing. It was the part when the girl, oh my God, it's gonna make me sound so mean, but it was the part, spoiler, where the girl, the blonde, she was just like banging her head up against the window of the mirror. It's like, what happened? Like she just malfunctioned. I don't know. I just remember laughing as a child. Anyway, I'm not mean, but yeah, I really enjoy that movie, and I feel like we were kind of like ripped off. We should have got a sequel. What happened? And then even when it's, not so much, straight horror, if it's more like thriller, suspense, like with Teaching Mrs. Tingle, that movie put you through it. It's kind of like those characters. It is like what you said, Justin, with the faculty, hip. Teaching Mrs. Tingle is a hip movie, actually, Oh my God, I sound like 50, but no, it's true. It is. Because when you think about it, you have these kids, they're about to graduate. It's supposed to be fun times. And then tragedy kind of, well, not really tragedy, but something crazy happens, So I just find that really interesting. And again, even when I think about with Cherry Falls, I used to be so obsessed with that movie. I don't know why my parents let me rewatch it so many times, like as I see it as an adult, but yeah, I'm a huge fan of 90s horror. And again, when I think about 90s horror, The Faculty comes to mind, Disturbing Behavior, and The Craft, actually. It just represents like the 90s perfectly, from the dialogue, like the way they talk. Even though with the faculty, I don't know about you guys, it was my first time hearing the word tweaking. I didn't know. I don't know. Maybe I was sheltered. I don't know. But I okay. Yeah. And then with The Craft, with the situation with that one, you have this girl, Sarah, she moves to, LA. She's new, kind of we talked about with the different cliques. At that school is very much apparent, and she just so happens to fall in with these witchy women, and but yeah, that's a rabbit hole. Point is, love, again, 90s horror. I love the energy of it. I love that it's kind of chaotic and you get a little bit of everything, and I kind of miss it. I know we all go through our phases where, because I know with myself sometimes personally, I'm just like, oh man, I'm all about like 70s horror, but then I've been finding myself going back to the 90s and rewatching some stuff because it had that fun added to it.
Yeah, I think fun is such a huge part of it. And I also think that was the first time I ever heard of the word tweaking as well. Like I said, I was a little bit nerdish, so I did it, it was one of the first times I heard it. And another thing I'd just like to say real quick about 90s thriller, or that 90s time in horror, are I love a good chase scene. I've said that several times on this show. And the 90s, these movies all provided amazing ones. I remember I Know What You Did Last Summer with Sarah Michelle Gellar, with Sarah Michelle Gellar's character. The whole sequence with her, I remember it was most of the trailer was cut from that. And so I was just waiting. I'm like, this is going to end with her jumping through a window, and I can't wait because I'm a weird, dorky guy, I guess. And I just love it. And so I just wanted to say that there was another thing I meant to say about these 90s photos. And again, Kevin Williamson teaching Mrs. Tingle. I think that that's more, the dark comedy sort of side of it. And I love it. I think that's just as important aspect as the sci-fi part of it, the chase sequences, the gore, all of it. And this time is really special because, like Zena, you said, it was fun. It really was just fun. But Tyler, what do you love about that era of horror?
I think one thing that comes to mind is I love the fact that Kevin Williamson seems like a screenwriter that still remembers what it's like to be young. A lot of times I think that these movies are written by people that are like ready to be put out to pasture almost. They don't remember what it's like to be a kid. And so it feels stilted and it feels awkward and it feels unnatural. But I think Kevin Williamson scripted characters in Scream, in The Faculty, in various projects that he did for television, like The Secret Circle, I think it was called. He scripted characters that you felt like you could relate to, when you were around that age or a little bit older, maybe, rather than feeling like, who are these people? Why do they talk like that? Like they're talking like a screenwriter would talk, like a screenwriter would think that teenagers would talk. But I've never felt like that with his films. And I think that's one of the things that makes them maybe so accessible, and, why even the less lauded films from his filmography still have a huge fan base, like The Faculty, for example. It wasn't a critical darling, but there are people like us that really get it and really connect with it. And I also, the other thing is I appreciate how referential 90s horror was. The Faculty is very meta, very referential. They're talking about Invasion of the Body Snatchers. They're, talking about Sigourney Weaver in Alien or Aliens. They're, there are all kinds of in references like that. And it's like, I think that maybe was the point where film nerd culture was really kind of starting to take off. And I think he as a screenwriter really sort of spoke to that in a way that we could all relate to.
I think Kevin Williamson, and I think it's no surprise that so often we compare these films, specifically Scream, but all of them basically, we compare them as these John Hughes like he takes the John Hughes generation and puts them in these horror movies. But I don't think that's any surprise because John Hughes had that same exact ability as Kevin Williamson to really extract the dialogue that teen culture was having. Kevin Williamson caught that in the 90s. I think you're absolutely right, Tyler. He was able to remember what it was like to be a little bit younger. But what was cool about him too, at the same time, not only did he capture that, echo what was going on, but he also did use, it was very common, and this was very much displayed in Dawson's Creek, sort of these, 6-syllable words, the higher, there's sort of like higher language, higher verbiage he used in order to articulate the sort of thoughts that most teens weren't using, but I think that in such a way we wanted to then use those words. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like it made us not want to be around that or, reject that sort of idea, just like you said. And not only did it echo what we were saying at that time, it made us want to be a little smarter, which thus I think really wraps into what you were saying, Tyler, about like it was the genesis of sort of embracing nerd culture. But at the time, I wanted to be hip, and part of being hip were being like these kids that use these $20 words, so I just think that's really interesting. And just one more thing, yes, about the language, I think one of my favorite moments in The Faculty is when Clea Duvall and Elijah Wood are in the library, and all these movies at the time that were like about a very specific topic had a very specific moment that referenced a very specific culture. And in that moment, it was the sci-fi fiction, and they're talking about it in a way that, like, of course, these kids, these two particular of the entire cast, are going to be the ones that come together to talk about it. But I just love the moment where they're debating science fiction and Invasion of the Body Snatchers And she's basically like, well, you can disregard that whole theory because Invasion of the Body Snatchers is based on the Puppet Masters. And it's so cool because I just feel like it's two kids talking. And it's one of my favorite moments. But also, it really is a way of delivering the exposition that would typically be boring in a movie. I don't know. I guess I'm weird. I don't mind exposition. I guess I've noticed in like movies and shows and stuff, people are always like, oh, exposition. I love exposition. I want everything explained. Maybe that's why I'm so fascinated with David Lynch. But anyway, I digress yet again. I love that scene. I just think it's a really refreshing scene that really, if there's one moment in maybe any of those movies that so specifically speaks to the Kevin Williamson dialogue and the influence it had on teen culture at that time, it's really represented in that moment between these two characters debating science fiction and whether or not they can be, there's pod people. And she's basically like, well, he's like, there's no pod, so it can't be that. And then she's like, well, maybe it's a parasite. And bam, everything makes sense. And it sounds a little bit cooler because at the time, Invasion of the Body Snatchers would have been like, oh, old movie, who cares? But something about parasites sounded fresh again. And it just shows again how they had their finger on the pulse of what was going on. But speaking about, the parasite and everything, what do you both think of the special effects? I'll just say real quick, it was obviously that time CGI was now making its mark. We were getting more familiar with it. And I just think that this movie was the perfect example of bringing the CGI into horror in a way that was never going to take you out of it, because the parasite itself is so unique that you can believe what you're seeing on screen is real and cool in a way that makes everything a little bit scarier and more believable. But whoever wants to take the lead on this one, what do you both think of the special effects?
I love the kind of frequent references to the Thing. The red, stringy, tentacly. I don't even know what to call them, and I don't know what to call them in the Thing. So I feel like I'm just kind of like fumbling all my words. But I loved that was a very deliberate and very obvious send up of the Thing, because I think that Invasion of the Body Snatchers and The Breakfast Club were the big three influences for Kevin Williamson's screenplay, and probably had an impact on Robert Rodriguez's direction. And like Zena was saying, God, he really was, he's still hot today, but he was super hot, on fire in the 90s with, Desperado, From Dusk Till Dawn, The Faculty. He was just, hitting it out of the park back to back to back. And, I think that the two of them pairing up was pretty epic. And I think that what they did with the effects was pretty impressive. And I think that, like you said, the CG isn't so clunky that it's going to take you out of it. It's more about things that they couldn't realistically accomplish practically were achieved using CG, and most everything else was achieved using practical effects. So it was a great kind of love letter to the practical effects films of the 80s, like The Thing, while still sort of branching out and doing something a little bit modern, which is, I think, a lot of what Kevin Williamson does. He kind of harkens back to that which we've seen before, but he puts a fresh, new spin on it that kind of reinvents it. And, it's worked really well for him.
Absolutely. What do you think, Zena? What do you think of the special effects?
I love it. I kind of touched on it earlier, but it's kind of like what Tyler said. There's like a nice little balance there. There's like a nice little mix going on. And I know you didn't say that like exactly, but I know your heart, Tyler. So
you're not taking me out of context, I promise.
But no, yeah. I kind of wish that more movies would do that even today. Just because it was just something really creepy but enticing about that creature. Like, obviously, if that was in your face, you'd be freaked out, like, urinating all over yourself, or, running. But the thing is, I'm sorry, I don't know why I said that, but no, I just mean, like, I love the way it looked, and especially the scene that always comes to mind is when it jumps in the pool and it starts going, super fast, and then it kind of turns and they start using like CGI for it. Because again, like, I rewatched it, and of course there's some stuff that's a little bit dated, but it doesn't look bad. I think that it aged well. And I feel like if you're someone new to the movie, I think that you would still enjoy it. I think that even like younger people would enjoy this movie as well. But yeah, again, like, I felt like they did a really good job with like the whole creature design, because again, there's something super enticing about it. Also, there's a couple of eyeball trauma with the teacher that kind of like freaked me out when they kind of like stabbed him in the eye and he starts freaking out.
I wonder if that could be a deliberate reference to Italian horror. You know, like Argento and Bava, both really, especially, sorry, Argento and Fulci. Sometimes I transpose Bava and Fulci, but Argento and Fulci both had some pretty epic, pretty memorable eye trauma scenes. Argento, off the top of my head, in Opera, and then Fulci in like every movie he ever made. So I wonder if maybe that was, you know, either a subconscious or a deliberate, you know, kind of nod to sort of the forefathers of what we think of as modern horror, you know, 80s and beyond, you know, because the Italian genre film directors were, you know, kind of setting up the slasher boom of the late 70s and 80s. So I guess I just, you know, it makes me wonder if maybe that was an intentional send up, or could just be pure happenstance. Who knows?
That's a good point. I can see that.
Well, and I just like to say too, just with what you were saying, Zena, too, about like it holding up. I'll tell you, you know, I have it on Blu-ray and it looks amazing still. You know, if I was watching my old VHS copy, which I'm pretty sure I still have, or even the DVD, you know, I think it would still hold up and look great. But I'll tell you, people, you know, because of the way they brought it all together, I don't know if it was Robert Rodriguez who behind the scenes got it, but they made it work in a way that it's still, it doesn't look like dated CGI in any means. I will say, you know, and I guess this kind of goes with special effects. There, you know, the film is, because it is cheesy at times in the best possible ways. I mean, I'm always a fan of films that are like, if you get the leader, you get them all. Whoever the main bad guy is that started this, whether that's in vampires or something, I don't know. Maybe I'm you know, just optimistic. I want there to always be a way that there might be that happy ending. And I like the idea of you get the leader, you get them all. But there are slips in logic, like the effect with Mrs. Burke, the one teacher. I mean, she's literally beheaded and then, you know, going around with just the head and stuff. But like, yet she, like, how would she really, you know, come back after that? But really, I don't care. I'm glad that she comes back at the end to have that little inappropriate but adorable moment with Zeke later on. Again, that's just, you know, the special effects hold up well. Even the cheesy ones that are completely void of logic are still, I think, worth taking a look for this movie. But now I'd like to move on to discuss the performances of the movies. I'll say that The Faculty has one of the best ensemble casts, I think, of all those movies. But I will say, of all those movies, I don't think even like the weakest of those movies, I don't think any one of them really has a bad cast. Like the ensemble all seems to get what movie they're in and seems to like be totally to like make it a success and be on the same page. And it seems like they are. But again, that being said, I do think The Faculty has one of the best. I think, you know, these were all up and comers. I know it's super easy to say that in hindsight, but even at the time, like I said, I watched Josh Hartnett in this movie and I was like, oh, he was the guy in Halloween H2O. Like I was recognizing it. Or Elijah Wood, who was always super talented as a kid actor and all of that. But you also had like Clea Duvall, who would go on to like do so many independent movies like But I'm a Cheerleader, or show up in Carnival, which is one of my favorite shows, canceled way too soon. And I just think it's really good. But they all do a really great job, because one thing about this movie, and I want to talk about this more when we get to the reveal, but I like that this movie, each of these characters sort of has to do this, walk this fine line of duality, which I think is a big part of this movie, dealing with cliques and how we present ourselves to the world in one way, even though we might be somebody different throughout. And it's one of the fun elements of this movie that you have like Zeke, who all of a sudden, you know, he's starting off first as like this dealer, you know, he's a troublemaker, not really, I guess, sort of rebel, but then you find out, no, he's like super smart and is able to, you know, create all this lab, create all the medicine to like kill the monster in the end. Or you've got Sean Haklassi's character, who's like the jock football guy, but he genuinely wants to learn. He genuinely wants to, you know, to earn the grades. He wants to earn that D. You know, he doesn't want to just be given the A. And I think that each of the cast really does a great job at providing that, you know, providing that sort of, you could see why they're interpreted or would be this character externally, but has the depth. to kind of walk both lines. But then again, too, we can't forget the adult cast because you have Bebe Neuwirth, Piper Laurie, Robert Patrick from Terminator. You have all this great cast, Famke Jensen, who we were talking about, Walking Headless. And I think that they all come together to understand the movie that they were in. And I think it makes it just all that much better. But Zena, what do you think about the performances and the cast and all that?
Oh man, I agree with you 100%. I love that this cast, it is just like perfection. It has everybody. You have Elijah Wood, you have Jon Stewart, he's in it. And then you have Usher. What is he doing there? But he's there, so it's so awesome, just to see him, in a different way, because he's that R&B superstar and everything like that. And even with Salma Hayek, she's there, so it's just like so many all-stars that's in this role. And I can I say who are my favorite characters?
Please do. Okay. I meant to, so I might have to myself later on, but please, okay. Yes, totally.
Well, besides from Stokely, also too, could we also say who we don't like?
Sure.
Okay, but Stokely, of course. But I also I do like Zeke because I feel like, kind of what you said, he is smart. He's just putting up this whole front of, what I mean? He's just selling drugs. He could have graduated, but I don't think that he wanted to. And you kind of feel a little bit bad for him because he's in his garage. He has a whole lab. His parents aren't around, and then also too, I do like Stan because it's just kind of like people were trying to put him in a box and he didn't want to be in a box. I think that that's really interesting. And I think this even goes back to what I was saying, how with teen movies and how with my friend, she doesn't like teen movies because, sometimes, not all of them, it could be very in your face. He's a jock, she's a cheerleader type of thing. We received that, but it took a turn where it's just kind of like he received like a grade, he got a D, but then the teacher changed his grade because of the game that they won, and he felt like that wasn't right. Like, that's not a normal teenage boy in a movie, that seems like he's like a real boy, so a real person. So I think that that's, really interesting with that. And honestly, I'm also going to say Mary Beth Louise Hutchinson, her long name, because I know I'm like mentioning everybody, but this is the last one, because it's like, I really did believe her. I thought that she was just this nice new girl, like, oh, nobody wants to be her friend. I would have been her friend, yeah. And then I'll wait to tell you guys who I feel is just terrible.
For sure. Tyler, what about you? What did you think about the performances in general? Who are some of your favorites?
I feel the same way about Mary Beth. I think she did a great job of flying under the radar. And not only that, the actress that plays her was also on Dead Like Me as a Grim Reaper. And she is completely almost unrecognizable just in like the cadence of her speech, her mannerisms. Like, she really goes into the role in a way where, yes, we know what she looks like and she still looks the same, but everything about her is different than, the characters that I've known her to play. And I think that's pretty, I think that shows a certain level of skill that not every actor has. I also love Stokely. I think that she really embodies the essence of being an outsider, and not just an outsider, but an outsider that doesn't necessarily want to fit in. Yeah. And I think that probably a lot of horror fans have felt that way at some point. We tend to kind of be on the, the fringe of mainstream society, not necessarily easily fitting in. And so I think that there's something very relatable about her character to me, and perhaps to a lot of horror fans for that reason.
Yeah, I will say, Stokely is I think my favorite character. When I think of the faculty, I kind of think of her and Josh Hartnett right off the bat. I think that Bebe Neuwirth is a really great performer in the movie. I really feel for her at the beginning, where she is sort of like being firm with the other teachers and sort of like, hey, this is the way it is. But then you kind of can see that she feels bad about it. She wishes it was different, but she's very pragmatic. This is the world we live in. This is how it is. And the fact that she's kind of like the only person that dies in the movie, really, as far as I know, because they, mistook her, which I love as a great moment for Mary Beth, because she does really, I'll say right off the bat, I was going to say this a little bit later on, but I'll say, I did see it on opening night, but we were actually like 5 minutes late for the movie. So I came in right as like Piper Laurie was stabbing B.B. Newworth. And I remember like only kind of thinking about it. And I'm like, well, I really don't know who this is about. I feel like people can be, you came in like misled that it might be, you know, you see a shadow in the teacher, but like for me, I was like, oh, I think it's supposed to be Robert Patrick or this, but I'm like, I don't know, is it? So I was luckily very confused because I did miss almost that entire beginning. But Mary Beth, I think, you know, she does play that line well, where with BB Newworth's character, when she accidentally, you know, releases the rest of the drugs, you know, in a way that you can almost interpret as she's just being zealous. But no, it's actually very diabolical. But Zena, do you want to tell us who you didn't like, or do you want to save that to a little bit later?
Sure. Delilah. Delilah is a terrible person. You know, at first, like I liked her, but it's like she's like a beautiful woman, you know. But then it's just like you see how she treats her boyfriend. You see how she's just constantly bothering, just picking on Stokely. And it's like, girl, why are you so obsessed with her?
Yeah.
Like, leave her alone at this point. And then on top of that, like even going back with her, and I get that it was the 90s, so you know, people didn't probably, not that people didn't care, but it was just kind of like, oh, you know, with her always referring to her as a lesbian. And it's just kind of like she went majority of the movie just calling this woman, like, you know what I mean? Just all types of names. It was just ridiculous and unnecessary. And she was a terrible person, you know? And then even when it comes back to her boyfriend, Stan, you know, she just never really seemed like she was into him. It's just like she liked him as the aesthetic type of thing, like, you know, but it was just guaranteed they were not going to be together after prom, not even graduation, you know? So
For sure.
I could totally see that, you know, moved on. She didn't really think that he was smart. I don't know. And it's just so weird because I guess maybe people were just like blinded by her beauty or something. I don't know. But yeah, like her, it was just really her. And like I said, when I was a kid, there was always just something about her. Like at first, like I said, I saw her, I thought that, oh my God, she's so cute. And it's just like, wow, it took her that long to put on lip gloss. I must be doing something wrong. But I don't know. I was 11. So yeah.
That's interesting. I don't think I've given it much thought about her not liking that character, but my own high school experience, that makes a lot of sense. You know, we had some big, scary looking guys and stuff in high school, but I was never afraid of them. I was always afraid. There were a couple little mean girls, and there was like one or two that definitely put the fear of God in me some days where I'm like, oh God, is she going to look at me and say something today? I just don't know. And Delilah is definitely one of those characters. It's no wonder Mean Girls became another, you know, mid 2000s huge explosion, because there's a lot of truth to that. I think a lot of people that were terrorized by Delilah type characters. So you have any thoughts about that, Tyler?
I just think she's the devil. I mean, I think that she is so superficial, and everything that she values is you know, materialistic or status based. I didn't want her to live. Like, I really didn't feel like she deserved to live. I think she should have died a violent and gory death to sort of pay for her sins. And if you think about it, and it just felt a little bit like she didn't have a lot of human decency or really value people's character or what they bring to the table outside of materialistic gains. And for that reason, I would have liked to have seen her die a very violent death.
She just swapped out Stan and just moved on to Casey, and it was cool, just handing him a magazine. And we get that end shot of her just happy ever after. Like, no, I agree with you. I think that she should have died like a terrible, horrible death because she was a horrible person. I bet that she didn't learn anything at all. I think that we need to get back the principal, and we need to get rid of Delilah.
Well, if it's cool with you guys, then I want to move on to the reveal and the ending, because a lot of what you're saying, I'm going to actually, I think, is interesting because I think it does circle to what Mary Beth was ultimately saying. And basically, you know, can we really change? So like I said, I was 5 minutes late. I did not see it coming. I had no idea it was going to be Mary Beth. And I'm usually great about being like, it was you. And I get it right away. Didn't. But I think that Mary Beth, it's an interesting character. I did not suspect her at all. Or at least because of the performances, I could easily suspect any one of them. And when you find out, you know, she is an alien, so therefore the new person here, the stranger, and you find out that like what her ultimate goal is conformity. Now, at that time too, in the 90s, I remember, you know, you didn't want to be a poser, you didn't want to be this. And conformity, you know, in general, we do resist that idea. And let me be clear, in general, I don't think people should conform, especially if it's to some sort of like megalomaniacal concept or whatever. But I do think, controversial to myself, Mary Beth does offer an interesting perspective because everybody did seem a lot happier. Or I feel like the movie kind of ends with this sort of thought of like, oh, she wants conformity. Oh no, that sucks. But when you kind of think about it, these characters who were their own very different selves, you know, Clea Duvall wearing the eyeliner makeup, she's out on her own. Casey kind of loner, wants in. They kind of all get what they want. And in doing so, they kind of all conform. And so you have this movie that is sort of like the main thing we're fighting is conformity ultimately. And I think that that is important and a good message. But ultimately, these people do tend to conform. And I think that maybe even the most with Delilah is she almost becomes the least changed. And I would not have said this. I had these thoughts before, but you two talking about it has really like maybe put the little key in the lock for me of like, oh wait, maybe I am on the right path with this. Because like you said, you know, Tyler, or like Tyler said, and Zena, you agreed, Delilah doesn't really change. And you know, they try to give her this little bit of a moment, like she has this alcoholic mother, so maybe her life isn't perfect, but it's kind of glanced over very quickly, and she doesn't change at all. And the other people do change, but they change to become almost mainstream. Clea Duvall is now wearing this like pretty dress at the end, and although Stan is no longer on the football team, it's okay. He's still conforming to a heteronormative relationship with this girl, so he still gets to be, and it's the girl like on in the social scales that was below him, so it's sort of like he's still a hero in a way. You've got Zeke, who's now on the football team. He's completely jock, oh, school spirit now, etc. Casey, who also doesn't, he does change. He becomes not cocky in any way and not insufferable, but you can see now that he's sort of like, oh, is it People Magazine or is it, you know, local or whatever? And I just think that the reveal of Mary Beth is sort of interesting because I didn't suspect it, but I also think her ultimate goal is interesting because it's so contradictory, because they are sort of like, oh, conformity sucks, man. You know, we all know that. Let's make a movie about that. But in the end, they kind of buy into that in a way. So I don't know. What do you both think of that?
Wouldn't you say that they evolve maybe more so than conform? Not including Delilah, but I mean, I think that Zeke, for instance, decided to kind of come out of his shell, try something different. But you see, he's still smoking a cigarette on the football field. He's still who he is at his core. I felt like it was a little bit of an evolution more so than a conformation, if that's the right way to say that. But that is just my opinion, and I could be off base with that. I guess I just interpreted it a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
I can see that, but it's like I kind of felt like the only person who really like changed, like with Elijah Wood's character, kind of like you said, it's like he wasn't too cocky, but just a little bit, because he was finally getting attention and he finally got the girl, you know. So all right, let him have his shine. The person to me that really changed, Stokely, you know, and I kind of felt like she conformed. Really didn't think that she had to. Like, she seemed like she was still the same person. Who cares if she wants to paint her eyes shut, you know? So I don't know. And then also with Zeke, like, I agree with you both. Like, he was still like himself. He's smoking a cigarette, and, you know, maybe he needed something else to do instead of selling drugs. And they did have a spot open since Stan was gone.
No, for sure. I think it's all interchangeable. I think we could call it evolve or conform. Like, I think that ultimately it depends. Who were they really before this event versus who were they afterwards? And again, for me, I just think that, like, especially with the character of Stokely, you know, he was falling for her as she was before with the painted over eyes. But now all of a sudden, why is she wearing this pastel-ish colored
Yeah,
dress,
like-
and the makeup is now clean. It's like Ali Sheedy at the end of Breakfast Club. That's who Stokely becomes. And you know, again, it's not a bad thing, good thing, or whatever, because again, I think that we all know in the end, conformity, you know, you don't really want to conform. You should be yourself, you know, but it is an easy trap to fall into when all of a sudden you are being successful to sort of conform to these sort of ideas. I think it's just an interesting thing.
I feel a little bit like the way that Stokely was portrayed, the eyeliner and all of that was like a costume. You know, she was putting that on to keep people away. She didn't debunk the lesbian rumor because she was trying to keep people away. And I feel like she learned a little bit about herself and stopped kind of putting on a mask. Don't get me wrong, I don't love the idea that, you know, goth makeup and you know, and being an outsider was sort of like maybe seen as something that she needed to evolve out of, because I think that for a lot of people it's just a way of life. But I also felt that in her case, she was kind of trying to keep people away, and she sort of learned to let people in. And I think maybe the change of colors and change of makeup was kind of symbolic of her evolution. But again, you know, I might be in the minority here, and I could be totally off base as well.
Well, I think it's
No,
great that
no,
we all have
I can-
different opinions about it, though. I think we like that's the whole point of three of us talking about it. We most certainly do not have to 100% agree on anything. We don't need to all conform to the same thought. You know, let's be
But when
completely on the nose here. What are you going to say, Zena?
I was gonna say, but Tyler, with you bringing that up, I feel like that's a really good point, and I feel like that makes a lot of sense because she didn't really seem bothered what Delilah was calling her. It's just more of her in her presence, you know? So, you know, it wasn't like she was going around or saying, don't say that. Like she was giving it right back. What did she call her? A tit bag slut? I don't know.
Yeah.
It was something crazy, you know? So that's what I mean. All right, maybe she just wanted to take that off then.
I think it's a good idea and all that, and I don't disagree. But at the same time, at the end of the day, you know, she could still be that same person. Was it really her look that was keeping people away per se? You know, it was her sort of personality. And I'm afraid because in the end, I've noticed this with the women in my life, as soon as they start to change who they are, the guy who fell in love with them for being that sort of resistant, angry person or whatever, as soon as they start to become the more traditional, they sort of lose interest. And so I feel like that's why I just happen to be a percentage more on the side of the conformity argument. I feel like the reason they're not going to make it past high school is because he's going to lose interest in her, because all of a sudden she's becoming the like, hey, I can be, you know, that girl too. And I think it's a beautiful idea. I would always want somebody to, if you change the outside to make yourself feel better inside, or because you're now feeling a certain way, better, more optimistic, then always go for that. But if you're changing because she now thinks that's what Stan really wants, that's where I'm kind of like, ooh, I don't know. But in general, what do you guys think about the reveal of Mary Beth? And were you guys shocked, surprised?
I was shocked. I did not see it coming in. Like you, Justin, I'm usually like, I knew it. Well, I saw nothing because she blended in. And again, you just believed her. And then she passed the test. So, you know.
I think it was a well-supported twist because she, you know, the signs were there, but, you know, we all three missed them. Like she said, I'm allergic to everything, you know, from aspirin to this, to that, to the other thing. And she's also new to the school. And then, you know, the day after she arrives or the day she arrives, day before she arrives, whatever it is, you know, all of this starts. So it's a well-supported twist, I think. But, you know, Kevin Williamson and Robert Rodriguez, I think, did a good job of sort of disguising it in such a way as to divert our attention elsewhere, kind of like sleight of hand.
Totally. Yeah, I think it works in the end. I think that it's clever. I think that I love the whole sequence with the pool and everything. But like I said, I enjoy movies that we get dwindled down to one character. And I'm glad that ultimately it was Casey that got to be the hero, because even though I feel like it was very obvious, I didn't guess it would necessarily be him, because I didn't know how it was going to take. I could have seen it being Zeke or Clea Duvall. I was glad that it was him that took it down. But also, I love the idea that though once you get the ultimate creator, villain, whoever it is, get the leader, get them all. I just love that idea. So I thought it was a very satisfying way to end the movie. Everything was brought together in the end that I thought was really successful.
It delivers a happy ending, but it still satisfies the urge to see characters get picked off and, you know, gory stuff happen. So it really is kind of a best of all possible scenarios situation, I think. I mean, you know, I really like the way that it tied everything up and that you get a happy ending, but it's still kind of a dark, you know, morbid, violent film at times. You know, it gives us a little bit of everything. And I like the way it comes together at the end.
Just real quick, I kind of wanted to talk about some of my favorite scenes, if that's cool.
Oh, I would love it.
Okay, so the first one, I love that couple that's always fighting.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And then when the boy, he's the one that gets, you know, transformed first, and he's just sitting there, and the girl's just pushing him. And
oh, it's fantastic.
It's horrible, but it's
no, but it's I love it too.
Next thing you know, they're both in love and happy. You know, I would have known that there's something wrong, and then because it's like we all like that's just such a toxic relationship. They probably break up every day, you know. So I also thought that was funny, and then I love the scene. These two are kind of like back to back. I love the scene when Stan goes out to the football field and he sees all the players out there and all those little things that are coming out of their head. Like it's crazy, because what can you do? That you can't, it's too late. He's already done. And then leading into that, when Stan tries to come back in, and like Stokely was so heartbroken that he was infected pretty much. So, but yeah, it's just such a great movie. A lot of great scenes.
I think, you know, The Faculty is the type of film for anybody that is enjoying wanting a 90s thriller, one of those horror movies in the vein of Scream. I think it all, you know, delivers on the gore without being too heavy-handed. It has excellent performances. It solid thrills, scares, a few twists and turns, but also a few ideas that most teens can relate to when it comes to can you trust your teachers? Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us. What is your favorite late 90s horror movie? Are you a fan of The Faculty? What are some of your favorite scenes? What are your favorite characters? What do you think about the debate versus conformity versus evolution? Thank you so much, Tyler Doupe, for joining us tonight. You can find Tyler over at Wicked Horror, Dread Central, or on Twitter at Fun with Horror, and Zena Dixon, the real Queen of Horror, who you can find over at realqueenofhorror.com, on YouTube under her Real Queen of Horror moniker, or over at Wicked Horror. And I'm Justin Steele. You can also find me at Wicked Horror, 411 Pop Culture, or on Twitter at Wicked Horror Justin. Thank you both so much for joining me tonight and talking about The Faculty and 90s movies.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, you guys. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's always fun, and we will see you soon. Have a good one.